Hey friends, it is Kate, and I am here with a long overdue side-by-side comparison of the MozArt Komorebi watercolor set and the MeiLiang watercolor set. So I have had both of these watercolor palettes for several months. I've used them both in many videos here on my channel, and I have enjoyed them both. I think before I go into some of the pros and cons and comparisons, both of them I think are extremely well valued palettes for the enjoyment that you'll get out of them. They both have convenience colors, metallics, and they both have a lot of positives going on. So I think whichever one you decide to purchase, if you are in the market for a watercolor palette, you really can't go wrong with either one. So that being said, based on your personal preferences, there may be some things that might sway you in one direction or another. And I also have a couple of updates for some developments that have happened with both of these since I have purchased these palettes. So first, let me start with general appearance. So both of these palettes come in metal tins. They are, as you can see, differently shaped. So the MozArt Komorebi palette measures approximately 8 inches by 7 inches, or let me see, for you metric folks, 21 centimeters by about 18.5 centimeters. And the MeiLiang palette is right around 10 inches by 5.5 inches, or 25 centimeters by 13.5 centimeters. So when you open both of these, you'll see the colors inside are very glossy looking. They're both dry right now, but neither one of them have chalkiness or anything like that. You can actually see they look a little bit glossy even though they're both dry, and they both have a wonderful selection of colors and convenience colors. And then the bottom row on both of these palettes, this is the metallic and pearlescent color selections. So in the Komorebi, when you're talking about the swatch chart, this comes in the lid, and it's actually glued into the lid, so you can't really remove it. However, each color is labeled and has a number and a spot to swatch, and each pan has a corresponding number underneath the pan itself. One thing about the Komorebi palette too is that it has 40 colors. It has full pans of color, whereas this has 48 colors and half pans. So if you are looking at color comparisons, I counted up the colors. Now I kind of made some decisions on where to place certain colors, but when you're going through, the Komorebi has 6 neon colors here, and this palette, the MeiLiang, does not have any neon. So that is something that's special to this palette on my left. And if you are into neon colors, then you're going to want to grab this paint set. That being said, they both have black and white. Now, the Komorebi has 3 reds, whereas the MeiLiang has 7 reds, although some of these reds are very similar on the paper when you're painting. Now, as far as orange, they both have 2 oranges. They both have 3 yellows, which I included yellow ochre in with both of those. The Komorebi has 4 greens right here, and the MeiLiang has 6 green colors. MozArt has 5 blue, and I include the turquoise color in with the blue, and it doesn't really matter because blue and green, the MeiLiang beats them by a mile. So the Komorebi has 5 blue, 4 green, and the MeiLiang has 8 blue and 6 green, and I'm also including Payne's Gray in with the blues. Komorebi has 2 purple colors, MeiLiang has 3 purple colors, and Komorebi has 4 browns, whereas MeiLiang has 5 browns. Also, the Komorebi has 8 metallic colors, where the MeiLiang palette has 12 on the full bottom row of this palette. They both have gold and bronze and some other various colors that are similar. And when you're looking at the pans, you can see that you have a really good collection of convenience colors for both of these. However, the one that's really setting the Komorebi apart is that they also have neon colors, which if that's important to you, you should go with that palette. Now, that being said, you can see my neons are really pretty much unused. I actually did a video not too long ago using my neons, and I do enjoy them. It's just not that it's just that I don't gravitate to them first in my palette. And actually my metallics are woefully underused as well, although I do use the gold in both of them, and I enjoy the metallics in both as well. They have wonderful shine and shimmer and a really nice selection of color. Now, after several months of repeated use, none of these have any type of weird smell, mold growth, mildew, any of that. And I work very wet. I'm always spraying down my palettes. I do let them air dry without closing them up, so I'm sure that helps. But I don't have any mold or mildew problems in either of these. They still are fresh. They smell just fine, and they re-wet beautifully in both palettes. Now, when we're talking about inserts, the inserts for both are pretty decent. So you can see this is what comes with the Komorebi, and then when the pans come, it actually has, I believe it was like a plastic sheet that kind of covered all of these, and that's long gone now, but it did come with a cover. Now, the MeiLiang, it has a really nice swatch sheet here with all of the color names. One thing to note is that the colors here and the colors here, a few of them are different, and you'll see in my main review video of this palette, I did list those differences there, so if you want to check it out, I'll leave a link in the description below. But I think there was at some point an update in the naming of the colors, and so there are some slight differences, although the colors and the pigments are the same. So it has the transparency and the Lightfast ratings on all of these. And the only thing that was kind of weird was the swatch sheet. It actually was kind of out of order. So if you were wanting to use this as a reference during your painting, it's actually really hard to find where your paint is in here because these are kind of backwards. So what I did was I cut them into strips and I taped them in the correct order so that they actually match my palette now. So I can look at it at a glance and figure out the exact color I want to use. And this is also really nice to have as well, but it's not necessarily a true representation of the color you're going to get. So it's always nice to have your swatch on hand. Now, with both palettes, your metallics are not going to be very light fast, and I would say in the Komorebi palette, they also will not be very light fast. But one thing I do need to mention is if light fast ratings are important to you, I would go with the MeiLiang because they're all listed here, and you can also do your own tests. But pretty much all of these, they have the 4 stars here on the sheet, and I'm gonna hopefully get this to focus, okay, there we go. So you can see the star ratings there for Lightfast, and you'll see that they are not there for the metallics, and that is because they are not Lightfast. They also have transparency ratings, and pretty much all of these colors are very transparent. Now, in contrast, the Komorebi palette, they have a note where their Lightfast ratings are available on request. So about a month before filming today, I reached out to their customer service and asked for their Lightfast ratings and pigment information. And they did get back with me, and they asked me for my order confirmation and a picture of my palette. I sent them information, and they did respond that they were going to send the request to the manufacturer, and then I never heard from them again. I reached out 2 more times and didn't get any response, and I was really disappointed because I love the palette, but I felt like the customer service really wasn't there. And it's also concerning if you are worried about Lightfast ratings that they really didn't respond. I know other people have done similar reviews on this palette and did get Lightfast ratings. I was just disappointed that I was not able to obtain those where they come with this palette. I didn't have to ask for anything and they're all listed and clearly labeled, which I very much appreciate in this palette. So I would say, as far as, you know, something you can kind of grow with, this would be a good one as you're learning about your pigments and all of those types of things. This is just much, much better in my opinion. And that's just me. And like I said, I love both of these palettes. I was just disappointed in the customer service. So one last thing I want to mention, and this is just a convenience factor, is that this comes with some nice mixing wells in the tin, whereas the Komorebi palette does not. And what I usually use with this is, if I want to mix colors, I have these couple of sauce cups that I keep around. But if you are using it and you're traveling or you're painting outdoors or anywhere where having all these extra things is inconvenient, the MeiLiang palette will kind of beat out there too, because your mixing well is just right here. And then when you're done, you just clean it, close the lid, and you're good to go. So what I'm going to do next is do some swatches. I have these papers set up and I'm going to just show you some of the differences on paper, and this is actually going to help me too. So let's start with the Komorebi. So I'm going to zoom out just a little and set this where you can see it in your screen, and I'm going to put my paper right next to it. So I'm going to spray okay, I've got my palette moist. I have made a list of the same color labels for both palettes, and I wanted to do a swatch on each one so that you can see what the similarities and differences are with both. And what I'm going to do is paint right over my lettering so you can also see the transparency or opacity of each color. Now for both of these swatches, I'm just going to go straight into the pan to get full strength paint, and I'm using this well, actually, it's a 1/2 inch flat brush, and I'm going to use that for both. Okay, so first I'm going to go into the white, and I mean, not that you'll ever really want to be using a lot of white, but you'll be able to see what kind of effect that has over the black ink on my paper. Next, I'm going to go into the black. So this is a deep black, and it's also very pigmented. All of these colors go down really nicely in both palettes. All right, lemon yellow. I'm going to get a nice brush load of that. Okay. Payne's Gray, and the Payne's Gray in the Komorebi palette is one of my favorites. I'm pretty much at the bottom of my pan there. Okay, next up is Burnt Sienna. Olive Green. Okay, Ultramarine Blue. I'm going to get a little bit more pigment there. I think the pan is kind of watery, so I made sure to get a good dip there. All right, Yellow Ochre. And then last but not least, Burnt Umber. Now, in my original review of this palette, the Burnt Umber is kind of funky in this one because you can see how it almost looks like there's some sort of coppery color sort of sitting on top. I'm not really sure what that's about because that's the only pan I have that really does that. Actually, all of my browns kind of do that a little bit in the Komorebi palette, but you can see the color goes down nice and dark. So I don't know. It's just always been like that. Whenever it gets wet and then when it dries, it just kind of sits there on top, but it blends back in when I re-wet it. Now, these are the same colors that are labeled across each palette. Now, at the bottom here, these are some colors that are specific to the MozArt Komorebi palette, and they're also colors that I have really, really enjoyed using. So I think I wanted to swatch a couple of the sort of stars of the show that are not necessarily available in that shade in another palette. So that is the turquoise. They also have a color called Hyacinth Violet that I really enjoy using. It's this really beautiful pinky purple, and it's a really nice rich color. And then to give you a hint of the neons, I'm going to dip into this neon pink so you can see how bright that is. It's incredibly bright. And I honestly don't even think that the camera would do it justice. I mean, it's like highlighter bright. Okay, I'm going to set this aside and grab my MeiLiang palette and get my little swatch card. And it's nice to have it this way because now I can actually see all of my colors. I'm going to get this sprayed down to moisten it. You know, I was just thinking, this Payne's Gray is down to the bottom too. So really, the Payne's Gray in both of these is my favorite. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go first into this white, just like that. And then I'm going to go into the black. Oh, something I forgot to mention too is that each of these pans comes individually wrapped. So that's kind of nice too. It just feels nicer when you're taking them out. All right, there's the lemon yellow. And I'm going to dip into this Payne's Gray. And you can see the Payne's Gray for the MeiLiang palette has a little bit more of a bluish tone to it. Now, the burnt sienna in this palette is a little bit different too. So the burnt sienna almost reminds me of a little bit of the burnt umber. The sienna color on the little swatch is closer, I think, to the burnt sienna in the Komorebi. So there you will see a color similar to that. However, I'm going to do the burnt sienna that is labeled as such in this palette, although it's going to be a little bit different than you might expect, and I think it's not quite got as much of that reddish tone that you see in a lot of the other burnt sienna colors. So next I'm going to go into the olive green. Now you can see these colors are also very rich, and they're slightly different in tone on some of these, so they likely use different pigments, but since I can't get the information from Komorebi, the only thing I have is the pigment information that comes with the MeiLiang palette. Okay, I got these backwards, so I'm gonna do the burnt umber, which on the swatch sheet it's burnt brown, but in the plastic insert it does say burnt umber, so I think that was one of their naming updates that they had. And then I'm gonna do the yellow ochre. Now the yellow ochre in the MeiLiang palette I think is a little bit more opaque than the Komorebi palette. Now for some of the sort of star of the show colors, I'm going to dip into the turkey blue, which is one of my favorites in the MeiLiang palette. And you can just see that really rich color there. It's beautiful. It's just so bright. Okay, next up we've got a deep magenta, which is another favorite in the reds. Okay, and then another one that I really enjoy is the light sky blue. And I don't really have a comparable color in the Komorebi palette, but it's almost like a Wedgwood blue, and it's just a nice kind of light blue color, and it's just really pretty. Okay, for my next test, I'm going to do a couple of wet and wet color drops so you can see how a couple of select colors from each palette spread. Also, I'm going to do a test on the metallics as well as a transparency test and see how opaque I can get the metallic colors. So I'm going to dip in next with my number 10 round Princeton Summit brush. And I'm going to start with the MeiLiang since I still have this palette here to my side. And I'm going to drop in some color into my circle. So I'm going to be doing first MeiLiang. I'm going to get a nice little coating of water on here. And then I'm going to dip into my Payne's Gray and drop that right in. And again, I'm moving straight from the pan. I'm just going to dab this in a bit, and we'll be able to see how that spreads when it dries. Now, since I am dipping straight from the pan, it's not going to have as much spread as if I were making a more watery mix in my mixing well. But for the purposes of this video, I think it'll be fine because we're still comparing apples to apples. I'm going to do the same thing direct from the pan in the Komorebi palette. And so next I'm going to dip into the ultramarine, and I'm going to drop a few dots of that in as well. And then last but not least, I'm going to go into the deep violet here. So the deep violet is kind of similar to the violet color in the Komorebi palette. And oops, I almost dropped that onto a dry sheet of paper. That would not have been good. Okay. Let's get this wet first because I'm getting chatty and losing track of what I'm doing. Okay, so we've got some wetness down there. I'm going to go into my deep violet again, and I'm going to drop some of that. So the deep violet in the MeiLiang is very similar to the violet of the Komorebi palette. So I'm going to set this one aside. And I'm going to grab my Komorebi palette again. And I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to come up here and wet this circle. And I'm going to first go into my Payne's Gray. Just like that. Next up, I'm going to wet this one, and we will do the same with ultramarine. Okay, and last but not least, the violet. And like you can see, I mean, the colors in both of these palettes are really beautiful. You really can't go wrong with either one. It's just going to be a matter of personal preference. Now you can see this has a little bit more of a purpley color where this leans a little bit more blue, but they're both really beautiful colors. Okay. Next, I'm going to do the metallics while we've got those kind of there drying. So I am going to be doing gold, bronze, and yellow. So this is the metallic bronze, the metallic gold, and the metallic yellow of the Komorebi palette. Now I'm going to get these really nice and activated because I want to make sure that I'm getting a really good color load on here so you can see just how opaque we can get it. Now you can see how beautifully this activates. My brush is dipping into it and it's just really sopping up that color. And this is the metallic gold. So I'm going to drop some color here, and then I'm going to also swipe it just like that. So I'm going to have a blob of color and a swipe for each of these. Next, I'm going to go into this metallic bronze and do the same thing. So I'm just mixing the water into this color, getting it in my brush, and I'm going to drop some color here, full strength, and then swipe. And lastly, I'm going to go into the metallic yellow, which is also real. I mean, all of these metallics are really pretty in both palettes. So if you enjoy working with metallics like I do, which, you know, it's funny because I have all these metallics available in my palettes, but I tend to always go for my inks, and I'm not really sure why, because the metallics in here are really beautiful. I do a lot of splashes with them though, so they're great for that, especially if you've got a nicely activated color. Okay, here we are with the MeiLiang. I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to start with the gold, which is up here in the top corner. I'm just going to give it a couple little sprays, and the yellow is kind of at the opposite end of the palette here. So I'm going to get this nice and activated. You can see the same with the other one, that gold just gets really nice and creamy looking in the pan. And so I'm going to come in here, drop that color, and swipe. Next up is this bronze that's right near it, and it's just wets really beautifully. The bronze, dropping it on, and then swipe. And I'm rinsing my brush very well between. Okay, next is the yellow. So on here it is flash yellow. And I think this might have more, I guess, mica in it. So the flash colors might be slightly different than the metallic of the Komorebi, but this will be a good test. I think the flash colors are slightly more glittery looking and more transparent. Okay. Okay, I have a fresh jar of water and a new piece of paper, and I grabbed my quill brush that I basically use all the time. I've re-wet my palette just to keep it activated, and this is the MeiLiang palette, and I'm just going to go through and just do some very general painting marks so you can kind of see how these colors blend together and how beautiful they look on the page. And I'm just going to be going into some random colors, letting them kind of spread out, blend together, and just how beautiful they are on the paper. And I'm going to try to go and do a pretty good variety of some of the colors in my pan and just let them mix and blend. And go into the yellow ochre, some of this violet, and since I don't have my mixing wells for the Komorebi, I'm going to go dipping straight into the pan on both of these. But you can see just the real wonderful quality of these paints and the spreading, the cloudiness. Some of them have really wonderful granulation, and you'll see it more as they dry. But I'm just going to go through here and add that color in. And I'm going to do the same thing for the MozArt palette. Let me go into some of this lemon yellow The lemon yellow tends to push back. Instead of it kind of all flowing this way, it wants to go that way. All right, let me get some of this red. Maybe another red. You can see the beautiful purple that's developing. I'm going to go into this light sky blue that I love so much. And how about, I think I've got this fresh blue. This is also a really beautiful blue color. Look at that. I mean, it's just gorgeous. I'm going to come and go into another brown. I'm going to do the sienna, and I'll come over here with that one. And maybe this emerald green, and put that up here. And this is all straight from the pan, so it's very pigmented, and look at that beautiful color. So I'm going to do the same thing with my Komorebi palette. So I'm going to grab that one. Okay, let's start dipping into some colors. I'm going to start with their brown, and then go into the deep blue, maybe some orange here coming off of that brown, maybe carmine next to this blue. That's really pretty. And let's do some lemon yellow. Whoops. My pan just popped right out. All right, I'm going into the carmine. And yellow ochre. And hyacinth violet. Some grass green. How about some ultramarine? Payne's gray. My favorite, turquoise. Oh, I love that color so much. All right, brilliant yellow. Go in here. Let's do an orange. Oops, that's the wrong color. You know what? Let's do violet. I don't have the real violet on here yet. I'm going to dip into a little bit more of that. Let's do some orange. And how about, I just dripped on my paper. So if we get cauliflower here, it's because I dripped. That was a mistake. Okay, how about this brilliant green? Let me get a little bit more. It's kind of a muted color. It's not quite as dark as some of the other ones in the palette. So if I go with their peak green, that's a little bit more like a Viridian or possibly a Hooker's green. And let's do olive green. And I'll put that over here. The olive green in the Komorebi palette is a really beautiful kind of opaque green. All right. So we're just going to ignore this spot here for the drying because I dropped a big old drop of water right into it. So we're going to let this dry and then we're going to come back and see everything. Okay, I'm back and we are completely dry. So I'm just going to do the last sort of overview and we'll start with the swatches and I'll give you a close-up and so you can see the transparency of the colors, the different shades. They are pretty similar across the board for the most part. And then you see our kind of star the show colors, at least in my opinion, but there's plenty of wonderful colors to be had in both palettes. This one is our Wet n Wet color drop. Payne's Gray for the MeiLiang. I may have had a little bit too much pigment on the end of my brush because honestly in like daily use, it's more like this one where it has some more dispersion, and you can see that this is a little bit of a stronger looking color on all of these, but this one actually I think would have spread a little bit more. Next we have our metallics. Both of them do a wonderful job with the opacity if you want it to be opaque, and then my sweep across, you can see just they're very, very similar and comparable. I think this one has a little bit more of a glittery look than this one. This one's slightly more metallic looking, but it's not a huge difference in sort of real world painting. So you can see that result there. Now on both of these, it turns out I got some water droplets that spilled, and I think it was because I was trying to work quickly. But this one is the MeiLiang, this one is the Komorebi, and I'll kind of put them side by side here. You can see they both have wonderful pigment load. They blend very nicely on the page when you're working with wet color, very rich color selections. I think for just the colors alone, you really can't go wrong with either palette. They both just perform really beautifully, and you can see that here. They're very similar when you're looking at a side-by-side comparison, and you can see they both have very rich pigment loads. So for this, they are very comparable. Now, with the packaging, the size of the packaging, you may prefer one or the other. You may prefer MeiLiang because it has mixing wells. And then price-wise, I did a little research. Okay, so I grabbed my note. Price-wise, I did a little research. And so the MeiLiang palette, this one, as of today on Amazon is $23.99 for the 48 color palette. So that is approximately 50 cents per pan in total, volume of paint you have. The Komorebi today, as of recording this, is $21.98 for this palette and approximately 55 cents per pan for the 40 pans of color. So you have 8 more colors here, but that is not all. So these have full pans. So in terms of total volume for the whole palette, you're going to get a little more bang for your buck with the MozArt Komorebi. That said, a lot of the pans in this are the fluorescent, the neon colors. So if you're not going to use those, then it's not going to be as good of a value. And then also take into consideration your Lightfast ratings and the different things that kind of come with this palette, which, by the way, it also has a little ring at the bottom if you're going to hold it. I personally have grown to prefer the MeiLiang, but it is very subjective. I really, really value having the mixing well built into the palette, and that's how I use pretty much all of my palettes. I really value that, and when I even use tubes, I prefer getting a metal palette like this where I can fill empty pans and it has a mixing well attached. I just use it all the time, so it's important to me to have. I also really value the Lightfast ratings and the pigment information that comes with the MeiLiang, but it's not necessary if you just want to paint. It's only necessary if you're starting to get more into where you're building up some color knowledge and, things like that. So, and also I was just really disappointed at the lack of response from MozArt. So that said, there's a couple of updates here too. So the MeiLiang, they have a 36 tube set that is available for sale now. There's also a 52 color palette, and I believe that one only has 2 metallics in it, but I do not own that palette, but I assume it's going to be the same type of paint, same quality. And I do believe also MozArt has a newer palette out, but it looks to be more of those cakes that you get, and I have not tried that. So if anybody has, maybe you can comment below and let us know if you own this and the other one too, if there are any differences in normal use. Another thing to note is the MeiLiang palette has a 36 color set with no metallic. So it's basically those top 3 rows of color. And that one is $20.99 as of today. Now these prices are subject to change and so is availability, but as of June 2024, that is where we are. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and this evaluation and comparison will help you decide which palette might be right for you. I think they're both excellent buys. They're both wonderful to use. I own them both and I paid for them both. I'm not sponsored or anything like that. So, you know, just take that information and make your decision. But honestly, for a beginner palette and even maybe more intermediate palette, you really can't go wrong with all the convenience colors. I think once you're getting more into professional painting and, well, really just more in-depth painting in general, you may want to graduate to something else where you can buy individual tubes and pans of colors that you tend to use a lot of. But these are both wonderful to get you started, and they are leaps and bounds ahead of those really inexpensive palettes you get for $5 or $6. And you can see that just right here in the color payoff on the page. So anyway, give this a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more like this, make sure to subscribe to my channel. And until next time, keep creating.